How many games have you lost 8-13 or even 11-13 where it felt like you played so perfectly that it had to be your team's fault that you lost? Well, none of them actually. Climbing ranks honestly isn't about playing a flawless game. That's a misconception. Striving for perfection might distract you from the glaring obstacles that are blocking your progress. And whether you play one game per day or over 150 games per act, you aren't going to be able to play at your best every single round of every game. However, once you learn some of those hidden things that are causing you to lose rounds, which are completely out of your control, mind you, it makes it a lot easier to focus on the things that are in your control. And this precisely is the secret to ranking up that allows Radiant players to steamroll through the ranks act after act. It starts with understanding that perfection isn't just unrealistic, it's also a complete misdirection and hinders the development of your understanding of the game altogether. One thing that will immediately change how you view climbing ranked is accepting what is and will always be unreliable. In solo queue, your team will mostly be unreliable, but that's honestly not the whole story here. One thing that you'll hear from top pros is that even your aim is unreliable, no matter how much aim training that you do. It's a huge advantage to improve your aim, and you can have a pop-off game where your aim did carry, but finding yourself thinking, if only I hit that shot, we would have won, usually means you're overlooking the strategies that would have made landing that shot infinitely easier. If you identify what you can control and learn to play to your team's strengths, you'll start striking a balance between self-sufficiency and cooperation based on your team's capabilities. To show you how to strike this balance, we're going to go through a VOD review session from one of our SkillCapped subscribers. He has a considerable amount of playtime, but despite all of his efforts, it always feels like his teammates are deliberately sabotaging his games. This is just one of the many techniques we go super in-depth on within our hyper improvement system over at SkillCapped. Much of ranking in Valorant is about filling in the gaps for your team. In fact, if you watch our Unranked to Diamond series on the website, this is exactly what you can see us do for every single match as we climb all the way to Diamond. We showcase how even without any team communication, you can still adapt to your teammates and carry matches. This is an excellent course that's received many 5-star ratings from our viewers, showcasing exactly how anyone can climb to Diamond in just a few weeks. If you're really looking to improve, this may be exactly what you need to start climbing. Even better, we're so confident we can help you improve, we'll give you your money back if you don't find value from our site. And don't forget that every single site subscription also includes a free VOD review in our community Discord. So you'll be getting direct advice from our top tier coaches as well as the best courses on the internet. How can you fill in the gaps though? One of the most valuable skills you can develop in Valorant is adaptability. This player has a decent amount of playtime and even a well-defined play style. They have insane lineups for scenarios I've never even imagined, but they actually win some rounds because of their unique game knowledge. But they make one of the biggest mistakes you see in both low and high elo that players of every playstyle need to take note of, lineups or not.
Okay, now here's my issue with playing for lineups. I'm seeing a pattern just by watching your attack side here that you are not helping your team in any way during post plants because you're so fixated on lineups. I do think lineups are important, but they should be a last resort option. I think the next round is a very good example of what I was just talking about.
30 seconds left.
Plant the spike.
9.
Okay, right here. So instead of talking to your teammates who are alive about what you guys could do during post plant, holding a cross, taking space away from the enemy to make it harder for them to post plant, using your utility together, anything, literally anything. Instead of doing that, you are spamming your plant spike at this jet because you have a lineup. Like I said, I feel like lineups are important and I think that they can win games and I think they can win rounds, but I think they should be used as a last resort option. And I feel like you're trying to use that as a first resort instead of using your gun and creating plays with your team on the fly. Because now in this situation, instead of the bomb being planted and you guys having good post-plant positioning, your jet is now planting in the corner where you wanted them to 10 seconds later because you have a lineup. And that gives the enemy team more time to get ready to retake and get better positioning against you guys.
Our coach Akuma describes the takeaway for all of us from his coaching session perfectly. The number one takeaway for all players from what Akuma said here is to understand when you're using something that is a second, third, fourth, or even last resort option as a first resort option. How many times have you done or seen someone not do something that you know is out of place, like a sentinel entering or your only duelist lurking? If your team won't follow you or your duelist into sight and doesn't respond to your comms when you ask them to put smokes down, sometimes the smartest option is to just rely on yourself to fill in the gaps of what's needed. The problem comes when you don't try to identify the strengths and weaknesses of your team both in general and in the moment before changing your decision making. If your teammates are all communicating and have good vibes, but lack coordination and don't really know what to do in certain scenarios, try to add comms at key moments mid-round and in the pre-round that will indicate to people that they need to put down smokes, entry into sight, or whatever else. If you're getting ready to push out into the side and you're a duelist, mention that you're about to push in, and your smoke player should know to put down smokes. If they put down smokes, and your team seems to know how to follow up with you, you may not need to say much more than that in future rounds because your team works well together. Though, as I'm sure you're aware, this isn't always how it goes. If no one knows how to follow up or the enemy team has a good setup for what your team is trying to do, then after one or two instances of this happening, you should be able to identify the major strengths and weaknesses, which you can use to modify your playstyle and adapt to win. In this situation, your team's strengths are communicating and good vibes, so they're more likely to continue working well together. Their weaknesses, though, are not knowing how to get out onto site or how to play their role well enough to win against the other team. There are more strengths and weaknesses you can continue to identify throughout the game, but just a couple rounds into the game or the half, you are starting to problem solve. After a while, you'll be able to take note of these things for the enemy team in a more targeted way than what you probably do already. So, what do we do from here though? How do we know what to do with this information? How do we fill in the gaps? Well, throughout the entirety of the game, you can take notes of strengths and weaknesses that inform your decision making. But that's awareness throughout the entire game as opposed to awareness in the moment. In the moment, you ideally want to know where your teammates are and use that information to improve your moment-to-moment decision-making. After all, the only way to adapt to your teammates is to have a good understanding of where your teammates are. And one thing pointed out by our coach Akuma took place in this round, where our subscriber tried to take sight with his team and died in an awkward spot with no support from his teammates. It looks like he assumes that since his team is in tree, they will push into sight with him and he'll be able to plant the spike safely. But what happens instead is his team didn't scale into sight at all and he was left out to dry. Honestly, what could he have done differently here? Well, when looking at the minimap before he starts pushing into sight, you can see that his team is all over the place. His Gecko is lurking into B, his Breach is with us but backs up moments later, there's a Reyna backside, and the rest of his team is having trouble getting into sight from tree. So instead of pushing out with this smoke that he placed earlier disappearing and no real support on site, what we could have done instead is either wrap back earlier with his Breach and push out onto site through tree with his team. From here, we can hold an angle and decide from a safe position to play off of his allies as they scale, or rotate to the Gecko on B side. But let's be clear though, our teammates didn't position themselves in an ideal way, and the only options we're left with are honestly not great. This is the pitfall that this player fell into here though, and when faced with a difficult decision, he made one of the many non-ideal plays like most players would. However, with more coordination, he absolutely could have provided significantly more value to his team by making this exact same play. But what's better, making a play that you think would be ideal when your team isn't going to give you the support you need, or making a bad play as a team and having a shot at making it work? We have lots of role-specific advice across our videos and in our coaching sessions, which can serve as a foundation for you to create winning scenarios for your team as your chosen role. But But this advice only works when you're able to identify the situations where it's applicable. So regardless of your role, look at the minimap every few seconds, and instead of forcing a play that nobody on your team is ready to assist you with, try to see whatever your team is doing and see if you can make a play that complements that really well. This also applies to when you yourself make the call that your team is following in the round. If your duelist wants to lurk, you might need to entry. If your team doesn't have a sentinel, you might need to watch flank. Think of it as glorified babysitting here. If you're not used to looking at your minimap, start by looking once every 10 seconds. Once you're more comfortable with that, start doing it every 5 seconds. We've even heard of players setting up a timer that will beep periodically to remind them to look at the map. In some scenarios, maybe you don't want to risk looking at the map though. If you're holding an angle and don't want to risk it, don't be afraid to ask your teammates what they're seeing or what they're hearing. Oftentimes, this can be a great way to get the information you need without risking anything. We've covered awareness that informs your decision-making throughout the game and awareness that informs your decision-making moment to moment. But this isn't the complete picture here. Sometimes, it really does feel like you're playing a 1v9 instead of a 5v5. Your teammates can be cool, but not really take the game as seriously as you do, or at the other end of the spectrum, take it so seriously that they're tilting themselves and are practically useless. So what do we do when you're doing everything right, but nothing is helping? Sometimes all you can do is look at your minimap, focus on what you can control, and learn from different scenarios to inform your decision-making outside of the game. If you and your team do everything in this video right and still lose the game, that's not really a complete loss. That's honestly a win. Every loss will help you improve the systems you use, which can help you to win more games over time. And when you're winning, it's really easy to overlook your mistakes since you won't be getting punished as much. But when you're losing, the lessons are a lot more clear. If we go back to the example made at the beginning of the video, apply all of these techniques and you lose a game 11-13, what are the odds that you won't be able to identify one thing that you could have done to win an extra round and give your team a chance in OT? Sometimes that's all you can really do. And if you learn to trust the process, trying to hit your rank goals won't feel as frustrating, because you can start to look at a win as learning from a game where you focused on what you can control. Ask yourself after a game is over what the strengths and weaknesses of your team were that you could identify. Then look for what you could have done to make those games work. Once you master awareness based on your team's strengths and weaknesses, you'll be on your way to striking that balance we talked about earlier of self-sufficiency and cooperation. And most people force a handful of different playstyles. And in a game like Valorant, with so many different variations round to round, being able to be fluid in how you play will set you apart from other players. This process, it can take time, but if you trust in the process, hopefully games will be a lot less frustrating. You'll start to feel better about games that you lose, which can improve your performance in games where you and your team have a good chance at winning. Your mental game, it'll be sharper, and you'll start to find more consistent results in game.